Hello math teachers. This video is to help you understand the new resource, Remote Learning Frameworks for elementary mathematics. So what is a remote learning framework? It's an adapted version of the elementary math framework planning tools by unit that contain resources for the virtual or digital world. Why do we need remote learning frameworks? Well, there's a lot of uncertainty related to the upcoming school year. These documents are just in case we start off in that remote learning environment and we only have a few days to switch, or if we want to plan a Google Classroom and we need some extra resources for in-school practice. So what is the same between a remote learning framework and a non-remote learning framework? The names of the units are the same. The length or the number of days of the units are the same. Possible objectives are the same. We want our students to walk away college and career ready, whether we're in the classroom or in a remote learning environment. The standards needed to be addressed are the same. The rationale and notes that support planning have not been adjusted, and they are aligned to DoDEA's core curricular materials, which include resources both from GoMath and on Schoology. So what is different? Why do we have a different framework or another piece of paper? We have now a link to the Common SEPA as a Google slide. Now, if you open the Remote Learning Framework in Schoology, the link will work. Or if you download it as a PDF, you have to open it through Google Chrome for the links to work. If you try to open it through Adobe Reader, as you know, all of our links have been disabled. But if you use Chrome or Schoology, the links, you should be able to click on it. So the Common SEPA is converted. Now we have a week focus. Because our time with our students is very limited, we want to kind of think of a little bit bigger picture. So we want to think week 1, what are we doing? Week 2, what are we doing? And how are you going to plan your lessons and your learning activities that will support that weekly focus? Some of the lessons have been removed. There is a lot of lessons in GoMath. You cannot do them all in a remote environment where you're doing that direct instructional time. We want to use our direct instructional time for that deep questioning, those formative quick checks, and a lot of times that instructional time, we might be able to use the questions from the book, but we don't necessarily want to teach the lesson. The resources tied to each objective have been adapted for the virtual setting. They're either virtual manipulative, sample lessons, maybe a game, or a center that the students can play by themselves at home. On the bottom of every unit remote learning framework are all the digital resources from GoMath and from Schoology. If you notice, we have our animated math models, our concept readers, our interactive student edition, the PDF versions of the books, Smartboard lessons. So every lesson in GoMath has a Smartboard virtual lesson. If you download those lessons, you can open them with our Smart Notebook app that we have permission to use. The Google Sites, which are similar to last year's by unit, MegaMath games, the iTools, and of course, our glossary for our vocabulary. So instead of the strategic intervention and the intensive intervention, the paper resources, we now have all our digital resources. I hope this quick overview of what a remote learning framework is will be helpful. One question I've been getting is, where do I find the remote learning framework? So if you go into any of the communities of practice, you go to resources. Underneath mathematics, you're going to see a folder that has resources for remote learning above Unit 1 or Unit 0 through 8. When you click on the resources for remote learning, you're going to see this video instead of the PowerPoint. You're also going to see a year at a glance, a summary of all of the weekly focuses and the standards by week. So this way you kind of have that big picture plan in your mind of how everything will be laid out. Have a little bit of background information and then your weekly focus and the standards aligned. There will only be 7 units, 1 through 7. Unit 8 is there's no new content. So it's kind of like a review of the entire year. So based on what your students need extra practice on, Unit 8 would vary by teacher or classroom. So the resources only go from 1 to 7. And then here you're going to have your remote framework planning tool. One of the questions I've received is, it says remote learning across the front like a watermark, like it's a draft. It's not a draft. This is because they're almost identical, especially at the beginning of the actual framework. So we didn't want people to get confused between a remote learning framework and the actual one. If you go down to the lessons, you'll notice that there's only approximately 1 or 2 lessons per objective. So with Go Math and face-to-face, we might have time to teach every strategy because we know kids learn different ways. We want to give them different opportunities to tackle the math. Unfortunately, we know in a digital world that our time might not be as flexible as it was in the classroom. So therefore, we're not going to necessarily teach every strategy. So the lessons have been kind of brought down so that way they're easier to manage and a little bit less strategies, but kids still get the content that they need. The rest of the units will be placed in this folder as well throughout the year. So this is Unit 1. Units 2 through 7 will be up, and then resources will be added, and they will be updated as resources are added. The other question I received is, what about Unit 0? Unit 0 is about building a math community. But because our building our math community is very different this year than it has been in past, both in the classroom and in a remote environment, as a teacher, you should be using your best practices and knowing what works for you, your students, and your schools, and all of the routines and regulations that are happening at the various sites. One new thing just in general is building a math community with social distancing. Some of these activities in here about our social emotional principles, you can adapt some of these for the remote learning environment. And then on the bottom of this new document, there's also some activities that you might want to be able to do digitally in a virtual setting or social distancing. So this document can help you plan for Unit 0 in your virtual setting. But you know best because you're the teacher. All right, I hope this helped. Have a great year.